Welcome, brave souls. I am your guide into the realm of the unknown. Here, among these ancient tombstones and whispering trees, we uncover the most intriguing and terrifying stories that will send shivers down your spine. Encounter the supernatural in real life. Each story will transport you to a world where fear reigns and the line between the living and the dead blurs. Are you ready to face your fears? Let the stories begin. Once, deep in the heart of a dense, almost impenetrable forest, stood an abandoned psychiatric hospital known as Elmwood Asylum. The local townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, warning curious souls to stay away. Built in the late 19th century, Elmwood was once a beacon of modern psychiatric care. However, dark secrets and unspeakable horrors lay behind its Gothic facade. The asylum was run by Dr. Victor Crow, a man of great intellect but questionable morality. Dr. Crow was renowned for his radical treatments, which he claimed could cure the most severe mental illnesses. His methods, however, were nothing short of barbaric. Patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, ice baths, and prolonged isolation. Those who survived these treatments often emerged more broken than before, their minds shattered by the relentless cruelty. One particularly stormy night, a fire broke out in the asylum. The blaze spread rapidly, fueled by the old wooden structure. Panic ensued as patients and staff alike struggled to escape the inferno. Amidst the chaos, Dr. Crow met his demise. Trapped in his office on the top floor, he burned alive, his screams echoing through the halls. Some say his death was no accident, but the result of a vengeful spirit seeking retribution for the countless lives he had destroyed. Years passed, and Elmwood Asylum fell into ruin. The forest grew around it, hiding it from sight and memory. It became a place of legend, a ghost story told to scare children. Yet the spirits of the tormented patients remained, trapped within the decaying walls of the asylum. And at their head was the malevolent spirit of Dr. Crow, still seeking new victims to torment. This is where our story begins. With two friends, Emily and Jake, both in their early 20s and with an insatiable curiosity for the paranormal. They had heard the stories of Elmwood Asylum and decided to investigate for themselves. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a spirit box, they ventured into the forest one cold, moonless night. The journey to the asylum was arduous, the path barely visible beneath the thick canopy of trees. As they approached the decrepit building, a sense of dread washed over them. The air grew colder, and the silence was deafening. They stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under their weight, and began their exploration. Emily and Jake split up to cover more ground, agreeing to meet back at the entrance in an hour. Emily wandered through the dark, narrow hallways, her flashlight flickering intermittently. She felt a constant chill and the sensation of being watched. The walls were covered in mold, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In one of the rooms, Emily found an old patient logbook. As she flipped through its pages, she read about the horrific treatments and the names of those who had perished. She could almost hear their cries of agony as she read the descriptions of Dr. Crow's cruel experiments. Meanwhile, Jake had made his way to the basement. The darkness was suffocating, and his flashlight barely penetrated the gloom. He stumbled upon what appeared to be an old operating room. Rusted surgical tools lay scattered on a blood-stained table. He felt a wave of nausea as he imagined the suffering that had occurred in this very room. Suddenly, Jake heard a faint whisper. He turned around, but no one was there. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on setting up the spirit box. As he turned it on, the static filled the room, followed by a voice, clear and chilling. "You shouldn't be here." Jake's heart raced as the voice continued, "Leave now or suffer the same fate." The temperature dropped and he could see his breath in the air. He tried to contact Emily, but his phone had no signal. Panic set in as he realized he was truly alone. Back upstairs, Emily felt a sudden urge to check on Jake. She hurried down the stairs, her flashlight guiding her path. When she reached the basement, she found Jake standing motionless, his eyes wide with terror. Before she could react, the basement door slammed shut, trapping them inside. A cold, malevolent presence filled the room. The temperature plummeted further, and their breath formed icy clouds in the air. The spirit box crackled again, and Dr. Crow's voice boomed, "Welcome to my domain." Emily and Jake clung to each other as the spirits of the tormented patients materialized around them. Their faces were twisted in agony, their eyes hollow and accusing. The air was filled with their whispers, a cacophony of despair that threatened to drive them mad. Dr. Crow's ghost appeared, his eyes burning with hatred. "You came here seeking the truth, and now you will become part of it," he snarled. With a wave of his hand, the spirits descended upon them. Emily screamed as icy hands grabbed her, pulling her towards the operating table. Jake tried to fight them off, but he was overpowered. He watched in horror as Emily was strapped to the table, her screams echoing through the basement. Dr. Crow moved closer, a rusted scalpel in his hand. "Your curiosity will be your undoing," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Jake struggled to break free, but the spirits held him fast. He could only watch as Dr. Crow began his gruesome work. Emily's screams grew louder, more desperate, until they abruptly stopped. Jake's heart sank as he realized she was gone. Dr. Crow turned his attention to Jake. "And now it's your turn," he said with a twisted smile. The spirits dragged Jake to the table where he met a similarly gruesome fate. The last thing he saw was Dr. Crow's face, illuminated by the flickering light of his dying flashlight. The next morning, a search party was sent into the forest after Emily and Jake failed to return. They found the asylum, but no trace of the two friends. The only sign of their presence was a single camera lying on the ground outside the basement door. When they reviewed the footage, they saw the final moments of Emily and Jake's lives, their screams echoing through the forest. The townspeople sealed the entrance to Elmwood Asylum, hoping to bury its dark past. But the spirits remained, trapped within its walls, waiting for the next curious soul to venture into their domain. And Dr. Crow, ever vigilant, watched over his eternal patience, ready to welcome new victims into his nightmarish world. The legend of Elmwood Asylum grew, becoming a cautionary tale for those who dared to explore the unknown. The forest remained a place of fear, its dark secrets hidden beneath the canopy of trees. And the spirits of the tormented patients, led by the malevolent Dr. Crow, continued to haunt the halls of the abandoned asylum, their cries of agony forever echoing in the darkness. From this wonderful and frightening story, we will move on to an even more terrifying and equally interesting story. The forest around Lake Whisper was dense and eerie, even in daylight. The locals avoided it, spinning tales of unnatural shadows and strange noises. At its heart lay the ruins of St. Hawthorne's Psychiatric Hospital, a place spoken of in hushed tones and fearful whispers. This abandoned asylum was now the site for a new project, a luxury recreation complex. The task fell to two construction workers, Jack and Ethan, who were unaware of the sinister history buried in the soil beneath their feet. As Jack and Ethan began their work, they couldn't help but notice the oppressive atmosphere. The hospital's remnants seemed to breathe with a life of their own. One evening, after a long day, they sat around a campfire, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the trees. "You ever hear the stories about this place?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just old wives' tales. You know how people get." Ethan leaned in, his face lit ominously by the fire. "No, man. This place, St. Hawthorne's, was worse than any haunted house. They say Dr. Harold Crane ran the hospital like a torture chamber. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. What did he do? Patients weren't just mentally ill, they were experiments to him. Electroshock therapy without anesthesia, lobotomies with ice picks, chemical baths. They say the screams echoed through the forest, and one night it all came to a head. Dr. Crane had this idea to conduct a mass treatment. He locked the patients in the basement and flooded it with gas, thinking it would cure them. Instead, he created a massacre. The gas was toxic, and they all died in agony. Jack shuddered. And Crane. Rumor has it that the patient's spirits, in their final moments, cursed him. He went mad, running through the hospital, screaming that they were coming for him. They found him in the forest, hanging from a tree, eyes wide open, as if he'd seen something from beyond. As Ethan finished, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the fire, plunging them into darkness. They scrambled to relight it, their nerves frayed. Little did they know they were not alone. The next day, strange things started happening. Tools went missing, equipment malfunctioned, and whispers echoed through the ruins. One night, as they were packing up, Jack saw a shadow move out of the corner of his eye. He turned, and for a split second, he saw a figure in a white hospital gown, staring at him with hollow eyes. "Did you see that?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling. Ethan nodded, pale as a sheet. "We need to finish this job and get out of here." Despite their growing fear, they continued working, driven by the promise of a hefty paycheck. But the hauntings intensified. They heard footsteps in the empty halls, saw ghostly apparitions of patients wandering the grounds, and felt a cold, malevolent presence watching them. One evening, Jack found a dusty old journal in the rubble. It belonged to Dr. Crane. The pages were filled with notes on his experiments, but towards the end, the handwriting became erratic, almost frantic. The final entry read, "They are coming for me. Their eyes, their screams. I can't escape. They will take me. They will take us all." That night, Jack and Ethan were awakened by the sound of wailing. The temperature dropped and the air became thick with a foul odor. They stumbled out of their tents to find the ruins alive with ghostly figures. Patients in hospital gowns, their faces twisted in agony, surrounded them. At their center stood Dr. Crane, his eyes burning with madness. You brought them here," Crane hissed, pointing a bony finger at them. "We need to get out of here," Jack shouted, grabbing Ethan's arm. But the ground beneath them shifted, and they were plunged into darkness. They found themselves in the basement of the hospital, the walls closing in, the air thick with the stench of death. Ghostly hands reached out, pulling them down. Ethan screamed as a pair of hands clawed at his face, dragging him into the shadows. Jack tried to pull him back, but it was too late. Ethan's screams echoed through the halls, then abruptly stopped. Jack stumbled through the darkness, desperately searching for a way out. He could hear the whispers of the dead, feel their icy breath on his neck. Just as he thought he had found an exit, he came face to face with Dr. Crane. "You will join them," Crane whispered, his voice filled with malice. Jack turned to run, but the ghostly patients blocked his path. They closed in, their hands cold and relentless. Jack felt their fingers dig into his flesh, pulling him down into the darkness. The next morning, the site supervisor arrived to find the camp deserted. Tools were scattered, tents were shredded, and there was no sign of Jack or Ethan. The project was abandoned, and the forest reclaimed St. Hawthorne's. The locals said the spirits of the hospital finally had their revenge. Years later, the area remained untouched. Those who dared venture near claimed to hear the anguished screams of the patients, and sometimes, if the night was still and the moon was high, the shadow of Dr. Crane could be seen, wandering the ruins, forever tormented by the horrors he had unleashed. The recreation complex was never built, and St. Hawthorne's Psychiatric Hospital remained a dark stain on the land. a reminder of the evil that once dwelled there. And the spirits of the past continued to haunt, ensuring that no one would ever forget the atrocities committed within those walls. With this wonderful story comes to an end, but don't be upset. We are moving on to another equally interesting story. In the heart of Blackwood Forest, hidden beneath the towering pines and thick underbrush, lies the crumbling remains of Ashwood Asylum. The old psychiatric hospital, abandoned for decades, is a place avoided by locals and whispered about in hushed tones. They say that on stormy nights, the souls of the restless patients still roam its darkened halls, and the faint echoes of their tormented cries can be heard if you dare to listen closely. It was on such a stormy night that two teenagers, Emily and Jack, found themselves lost in Blackwood Forest. The rain had come suddenly, transforming the forest floor into a muddy quagmire and turning the sky an ominous shade of black. Desperate for shelter, they stumbled upon the old gates of Ashwood Asylum. "Look, Jack, over there," Emily shouted over the deafening rain, pointing to the looming structure in the distance. "We can hide in there until the storm passes." Jack hesitated, his gut twisting at the sight of the foreboding building. But the rain was relentless, and the cold seeped into their bones. Reluctantly, he nodded, and they made their way through the rusted gate and up the overgrown path to the entrance. The double doors of the asylum creaked open with a loud groan, as if protesting their intrusion. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of decay and abandonment. Broken furniture littered the floor, and shattered windows allowed the wind and rain to howl through the corridors. They found a relatively dry spot in what seemed to be a former common room, and sat down, trying to catch their breath. Emily shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Do you know the story of this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack shook his head, though he had heard bits and pieces. He decided to share what he knew to pass the time and calm their nerves. They say Ashwood Asylum was once one of the most notorious psychiatric hospitals in the country. Dr. Victor Grayson was the head psychiatrist, a man infamous for his unorthodox and cruel methods. Patients were subjected to electroshock therapy, ice baths, and worse. Many didn't survive, and those who did were left broken. As he spoke, the storm outside seemed to intensify, as if nature itself was reacting to the dark history of the place. Emily listened intently, her eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "What happened to Dr. Grayson?" she asked. "No one knows for sure," Jack continued. "One night there was a riot. The patients, driven mad by the constant torture, rose up against the staff. Dr. Grayson and several nurses were killed, and the asylum was shut down shortly after. Some say his ghost still haunts these halls, seeking revenge on anyone who dares to enter." A sudden crash echoed through the asylum, making them both jump. It sounded like it came from somewhere deeper within the building. "What was that?" Emily whispered, clutching Jack's arm. "Probably just the wind," Jack replied, though he didn't believe his own words. They decided to investigate, if only to reassure themselves that they were truly alone. They crept through the dark corridors, their flashlights flickering in the oppressive gloom. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound was magnified by the silence. As they turned a corner, they saw a door slightly ajar with a faint light emanating from within. Jack pushed the door open, and they found themselves in what appeared to be an old operating theater. The room was eerily well preserved, as if frozen in time. Instruments lay scattered on a metal tray, and an old leather-bound journal sat open on a desk. Jack picked it up and began to read aloud. March 13, 1952. Patient 426 exhibited violent behavior during today's session. Applied electroshock therapy to no avail. Will increase dosage tomorrow. Dr. Victor Grayson. As he read, Emily noticed something on the floor. A series of deep scratches, as if someone had been clawing at the ground. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. Jack, we need to leave. Now, she urged. But before they could move, the door slammed shut behind them with a force that shook the room. The light in their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. They heard a low, guttural whisper, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're not supposed to be here!" Panic surged through them. They tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, and they felt a cold, oppressive presence closing in on them. Suddenly, the operating table in the center of the room began to move, scraping against the floor. They turned to see the ghostly figure of Dr. Grayson, his eyes hollow and lifeless, standing at the head of the table. His hands were outstretched, beckoning them closer. "Join me," he rasped, his voice a chorus of agony and madness. Emily screamed, and they both threw themselves against the door with all their might. It burst open, and they stumbled out into the hallway, running as fast as their legs could carry them. The asylum seemed to come alive around them, the walls echoing with the tormented cries of the past. They finally burst out into the rain, not stopping until they were far from the asylum's cursed grounds. Gasping for breath, they looked back to see the silhouette of Ashwood Asylum against the stormy sky, the ghostly figure of Dr. Grayson watching them from a window. They never spoke of that night again, but the memory of Ashwood Asylum haunted their dreams, a chilling reminder of the darkness that still lurks within its decaying walls. And the locals, they continued to warn everyone to stay away, for the echoes of the past are never truly silent in Blackwood Forest. So, brave souls, our journey in the shadows is coming to an end for tonight. We hope that these stories have stirred your imagination and given you goosebumps. Remember, the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and the line between reality and the supernatural is thinner than you might think. If you enjoyed today's stories and want to hear more creepy and unexplained, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you will be the first to know about new stories of horror and intrigue. Click on the bell icon so you don't miss a single creepy story. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some doors are better left unopened.